connection to Purim. Why? You'll see, because it has to do with wine. And Chayiv Inish Absumah Bepuria, Adel Yoda, a person is obligated to be intoxicated on Purim. Adel Yoda, says Rashi, Beyayin, with wine. Why? Because the whole story of Purim revolved around wine. That's the simple reason. But Yayin goes on Chassidus, Pnei Beis HaTorah, to be intoxicated on Chassidus. So this is the following story. You've heard of this person called Shneur Zalman Rubashov? This is President Shazar. He was the third president of the state of Israel. He came from Chassidim. His name was Shneur Zalman. So he served as president of Israel for 2 terms from 1963 to 1973. As part of his job as president, President Shazar often visited other countries in a diplomatic capacity. When Shazar was scheduled to visit Montreal for 3 days in 1967, the Rebbe requested that the Lubavitcher Chassidim living in Montreal arrange for a delegation of Chassidim to visit Shazar while he was there.
Visiting Expo 67.
Yeah, that's a picture with Nechama, right?
Yeah.
He came more than once. So, say my wife was part of that, and my father-in-law and mother-in-law and the grandfather were part of this whole delegation. She brought flowers, my wife, to give to Mr. Shazar. It's a picture, hangs on our wall. Anyway, so here's the story there. The Rebbe instructed that if they ran into any trouble arranging the meeting, they should inform the Israeli dignitaries that this meeting was an express request from the Rebbe. In fact, as the Rebbe had obviously anticipated, at first the Israelis didn't want to allow the Chassidim to visit, citing Shazar's busy schedule, full of meetings with all sorts of government dignitaries. But when the aides, Shazar's aides, told him that the request came from the Rebbe, he said yes, and the Chassidim were granted a 5-minute audience. Now, as always, the Rebbe was meticulous in his planning and instructed that the following 5 Chassidim go as the Lubavitcher delegation. Rav Pinchas Hirschman Olav Shalom was the chief rabbi of Montreal. Rav Aryeh Leib Kramer was the head of the yeshiva, and he was the address of Lubavitch in Montreal. Everything went through him. Rav Yitzchak Handel Olav Shalom, the Rav of the Chabad community, whose yahrzeit was yesterday. And Rav Isaac Shvei Olav Shalom, the Rav and Rosh Yeshiva of Timchet Mimim. And a Peretz Mochkin, Olav Shalom, elder Chassid and Mashpia, and he was also a personal friend of the Rubashov family back in Russia. Now, after listing which Chassidim should be part of the delegation, the Rebbe gave the seemingly strange instruction. His Rabbi Chadakov calls up Rabbi Kramer and is giving him the Rebbe's instructions. What's the instructions? The first 4 Chassidim listed, we just mentioned Rabbi Hirschbrunn, Rabbi Kramer himself, Rabbi Handel, Rabbi Shvei, and of course Rabbi Kramer himself. So these should be notified of the trip in advance. They should prepare themselves. They're going to the hotel. It's in the Queen Elizabeth, did I mention that? However, the Rebbe specified that the Peretz Mochkin and Mashpia, should be picked up on the way to the meeting. Don't notify him without changing anything. Now, the Peretz was a winemaker, and his clothing would often be obviously soiled with making wine while he worked, and there's a strong smell of fermenting wine. The Chassidim were concerned that without giving him a heads up, advance notice, he wouldn't be properly dressed or even clean enough to meet with the president. But no, the Rebbe said, sure enough, They arrive at Reb Peretz. Where did you live in those days, Chaim? Do you remember? 1967. Anyway, they arrive at Reb Peretz's.
Where the yeshiva dormitory.
Already in 67.
67. He lived in the basement of right next door to yeshiva. That's where he made the wine.
Yeah, I think that was
67.
Later.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when they arrived at his winemaking garage, he was in the middle of making wine, and stained, and the smell of grapes and fermentation. They told him, well, the Rebbe said, you should come with us. No. So, okay, he washed his hands and gets into the car. Oh, you Gewalt in the car. It smelled of a wine cellar full of the open barrels. This is how we're going to government officials. And they were wondering why the Rebbe had given such specific instructions. I'm just going to read the next paragraph. We'll continue. When the Chassidim arrived at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel to meet with the Shazar, Rav Isaac Shvei introduced all the illustrious and cleanly dressed Rabbonim gathered there, leaving Reb Peretz for last. Rav Isaac introduced Reb Peretz as an elder Chassid Mashpia, and he mentioned that he knows your mishpacha, the Rubashov family. Curious, Shazar asked Reb Peretz which of his family members he knew. Reb Peretz responded that he remembered them all very well, and started describing the different members of Shazar's family. When Reb Peretz came to Shazar's grandfather, Reb Peretz said that he had heard his special davening more than once, a davening full of gishmak, of deep pleasure. Do you remember the nigun he sang when he davened? Reb Peretz asked Shazar. Shazar said he didn't. And Reb Peretz began singing the nigun then and there that his Zayda used to sing when he used to daven. Now, just the next line, we'll continue. As Reb Peretz sang, Shazar's eyes filled with tears, and he said, yeah, he remembers now, this is the nigun. Then the story will continue what Reb Peretz Mochkin told Shazar and how that meeting continues to unfold. Okay, Be'ez Hashem, we'll continue the story.